If having a small podcast audience is most podcasters' biggest insecurity, well, then having a non-traditional background comes second. And I know this because I've worked with podcasters all over the world for the past 15 years. And while it makes sense for some industries to be regulated and have a traditional background, of course, that you don't want to go to a surgery and realize that the person operating you does not have a license, never went to medical school. That is not the same for podcasts. And the truth is that there's so many limiting beliefs, so many fears that podcasters go through, including not having enough years of experience to be called, air quotes, an expert with a podcast, or feeling like there's not enough things that they can talk about to be relevant for an audience, as well as not having skill overlaps or skills that are relevant throughout their career. And so in this podcast episode, I'm going to be telling you how I've taken some of my skills and work experiences that are completely unrelated to podcasting and made them incredibly valuable, but also how I've helped clients overcome those limiting beliefs, those mindset issues, to become really confident hosts that create show promises that attract loyal audiences. If we haven't met, hello, I'm Ed Xavier. I'm the founder of The Podcast Space. And as an award-winning podcast marketer and content strategist, I help entrepreneurs, impact-driven leaders, and also women and underrepresented communities all over the world how to utilize their podcasts in a way that feels exciting, sustainable, and of course, the best tool in their business to become known in their industry, an authority, and as an effective networking tool. All right, let's dive into this week's episode of The Podcast Space. One thing that I tell my clients time and time again, honestly, probably on a weekly basis, is that you don't need to be the most knowledgeable, the most experienced host to connect to audiences to build a podcast that creates a buzz online and offline, of course. But I would kind of say that a lot of clients push back on this idea, but once they start pondering about their favorite shows, what makes them unique, what do they resonate with, it kind of goes beyond the technical knowledge, and it is all the elements that make the show unique that kind of crafts a specific promise to the audience from the show that again, goes beyond having to know everything about a topic, that it comes to having the perfect media training. So I want to start by talking about my own experience, because I think that is so broad, and these are under no specific order. And then at the end, I'm going to talk quickly about a couple of clients that I thought these were the perfect example of how they leverage some of their interests and some of their past experience to create a show premise and promise that is really interesting. And so I want to talk about my experience as a sales assistant in a clothes shop. I actually worked when I was in London, in kind of the biggest, the most touristy area in London, which is Oxford Street. And so we had so many people coming every day to the store, but I digress. So as a sales assistant, your job is to, of course, depends on what store it is, but my role was to help people shop for clothes, help them figure out okay, do you need a size up? Think about this, upsells, all the things. And at the time, this was back in 2011. So obviously, the way that we looked at fashion and the way that we look at fashion now is obviously different. There's a lot of concepts that are different. And, but I will say that for sure, what it taught me, understanding colors, shapes, and how patterns look on people. But what I will say taught me the most was to start paying attention to how people talked about their bodies and how sometimes some insecurities showed. And so then when that transitioned into, me working in a podcast studio, I would look at people and they would always, primarily women, would ask me, because at some point I was the only woman in the studio. And so basically they were like, hey, what should I wear for the show? And while, of course, I can advise specific elements, for instance, and I see this mistake very, very frequently, actually. Someone that has a studio that is very dark and they're wearing a black turtleneck or a very dark piece of clothing. And so, for instance, right now, there's the black, if you're watching this on YouTube, there's the back of my chair that is, of course, black. I'm wearing a white vest, and so my walls are white. So if there was no in between how you would look at this, I could potentially disappear into the wall. And so we don't want a floating head. That's the last thing we want, right? We want you to stand out. We don't want to create too many credit elements in the shot. But of course, if you're doing an audio only podcast, who cares? But I would actually advise clients, there's like all of those like ideas that, smaller patterns are hard to see on camera. But to me, I would always tell them, like, make sure that, especially if you have a guest that is someone who you're kind of like nervous about, or you may not have met them before, wear the clothes that are the most comfortable. And so I remember when I was kind of advise them to think about like what they would like to wear. There's a lot of stress and emotion that can come up. So if you're wearing uncomfortable clothes, you're not going to make your best performance, right? So always make sure that you're wearing the things that make you feel the most confident, or alternatively, clothes that you love. For instance, a lot of people pick their brand colors that are meaningful to the color psychology or the meaning behind the colors in their industry. But most times I would say that those colors tend to be their favorite colors. So try to make sure that there's those elements of psychology that it makes sense, but also visually it makes sense, and that you feel your most confident. So whether that is putting, for instance, like a lipstick, your favorite shade of lipstick, or wearing that top that you always feel incredible in, that's going to do a lot more for you and your show than just putting that top that, it's the one that looks best on camera, right? So I want to help you keep that in mind. And I personally, since then, truly believe that, things like, oh, you don't wear stripes because they make you kind of bigger on camera, or don't wear this because it doesn't complement, this type of skin. Well, if you really like that, I mean, why not wear it? So I kind of like have learned since that it just like, it truly is about your energy. So there were some skills and knowledge that really came in handy later on. And so let's move into some of the best time that I had in my life. And that was being a front of house in a coffee shop. So taking orders, preparing things, taking payments. I could not, obviously, like, that's not a very exciting thing. But some of the hospitality skills that comes from you having a hospitality job, right? So for me, it was making sure that I would always clock in whoever got in the coffee shop and make them feel at home, make them feel welcomed and seen, right? And so that same thing for the studio. Whenever someone would walk in the door, I would always make sure that I would like very quickly approach them, because you never know, especially we did video podcasts. So a lot of people were really insecure. Maybe it was this was like back in 2018. So a lot of people felt really insecure about being on camera. Like, what is this thing called a podcast? And so I felt like it was my role as the hostess to make them feel super welcome in the space. And a show that has people that are having a good time, that feel at ease, is going to be a way better show than if the guest is super nervous because nobody took time to make sure that they felt comfortable, that they knew what was going to happen. And so, like, to me, those things really matter. Like, the experience, it's going to affect performance. Another thing that I think hospitality skills are really helpful is that it makes you think about the customer first. And I always think about this. So whenever, I'm onboarding a client now as a strategy client, I make sure that I am looking for visual cues if they feel uncomfortable, if they feel confused. Like, I always understand that there's so many new things. Like, think about like when you walk into a cafe, you're looking at the menu, there's so many options. You're like, oh my gosh, what should I look for? Can I read? There's a lot of noise sometimes happening. And so it's the same thing for our guests. Sometimes they just like, there's so much to think about that we want to make sure that they feel at ease throughout the experience, beginning to end. So if you have an experience in hospitality, start thinking about how you can leverage those skills, those soft skills, into providing your guests with the best experience ever. Like, I know that when I onboard clients, I'm always making sure that, I'm checking in. I'm like, hey, did the process go all right? Like, did you have any issues? If you have any questions, let me know, so that they feel comfortable and they return, right? Like, again, people do business with people. And so the more welcoming we can be, sometimes it's really scary starting a podcast. There's like so many different skills. It's 8 that you learn at least. So there's a lot. So I want to make sure that all of my clients feel like they're, appreciated customers. All right, let's move into obviously like radio and journalism skills. I have formal training in journalism, PR, and communication. So basically, the obvious thing, right? Like I know how to make shows. I understand not only how to look at data, but leverage data in a way that is meaningful. What do we need to know? Of course, ethically, what does the content need to keep in mind? I personally always think about like, what are the implications of sharing a piece of content that talks about, breaking news? Do you have the most up-to-date information? Are you covering things that come from a place of like verification? Did you verify your sources? A lot of my clients never think about this concept. I always bring it up like, hey, if you want to talk about something and you feel like you still don't know enough about it, do some research on articles that came out, documentaries, research that does kind of like fill in the gaps, that knowledge that you don't have. So it, again, on an ethical level, if you say, hey, this just came out, I'm still going through it, but I thought this would be a really relevant piece of information. Like my client, Lori, she works in senior living. And there was a lot of legislation that passed that required a lot of things that needed to be done from the consultant standpoint. And so she was like, hey, if you're a family trying to find senior housing for your loved one, you need to be aware of this. And so there were a lot of elements that, through the years, we've worked together for like the past 5 years. So there are some things that she already knows that I don't need to remind her, but like every single time I'm onboarding a new client, I always let them know that this is an option. If you want to tackle something because it's something that within your content strategy is lacking, you never talked about that, or if a client talks, or if clients ask about this all the time, that's a great way to do it. So obviously, like working in radio helped me better understand how to do an opening, right? Like the hooks, but also how to pitch things. And I think that like from a standpoint of like, why should they care, right? It's a really important lesson. What is the promise that you're making for every single episode that you're releasing? Does the content strategy for that episode answer the question that you said at the top of the episode, right? So did the title promise deliver when you're listening to the show? All those ethical questions and all of those elements that are part from like a journalistic standpoint, I always incorporate that. Like this is like obviously like the part that makes the most sense. Sometimes like the intersection of like really different formats, I just came out of a coaching session with a client where it said, oh, it would be really interesting to look at this part of your life and how that plays out with your podcast and how, the behind the scenes of your business. And she's always like, how are you always thinking about these really interesting connections? I never thought about this. And I'm like, well, because obviously like those are two formats that work really well, right? So thinking about what makes sense for the client, what makes sense to talk about in a way that feels kind of like easier, because I know that for some people talking about their expertise or their knowledge, it's a little more difficult than for other people. Thinking about what is the best way to deliver this information? Is it, for instance, a solo episode? Is it an interview? Is this a video podcast? Does this need to be a video podcast even though your show is a mix, right? So all of these things are really important that I find that have made me the professional that I am today. And then quickly moving on to the next one. So when I worked in the communications and marketing department of nonprofits, that taught me so much about how to create an effective marketing plan with very little to no budget. And so that's something that I use with a lot of my clients who say, hey, I am a small business owner. I'm already spending a ton of money on these different elements. How can I be more intentional? Some of the things that taught me how to also better market a brand and connect to partners was how to leverage our existing network to create content. How can we collaborate with them? Some of the athletes that we work with and the nonprofit I worked at in the UK, they would be in the news. They would do all of these different things. And so I would reach out to them and say like, hey, whenever you're doing all of these initiatives, can you keep me posted? We'll include that in the newsletter. A lot of the marketing knowledge that I also have today was acquired throughout that time. A lot of the things that I advise my clients on have been tested not only with clients that I have with different types of businesses from nonprofit standpoint. And actually, I have worked with quite a few nonprofits. So having that, it's not historical, but like that institutional knowledge about like, okay, how do nonprofits work? That actually has helped me advise a lot of clients because I understand not only like the logistics, the red tape that some nonprofits have, the mindset of the people working in nonprofits, the mindset of donors, how much sometimes things take and how limited things are because of budgets or funding from grants or whatever it is, right? I have found that expertise has been invaluable for me to advise clients that have podcasts in those industries. And so another part of my work is really helping podcast hosts understand that their interests more likely than not intersect a lot with the content of the show and the kind of like the persona that they build online. So for instance, I love interior and graphic design. I think that is one of the most fun things about your space. Your space and your energy are so interconnected. How do you create a studio? Like this was so valuable. Like I remember when I was like 6 years old, going through magazines and seeing interior design and architecture magazines. I just love that. And so when I was working in a podcast studio, how to design sets that actually have meaning and like, okay, if you want to convey a specific type of feeling, how are all of the elements within the shot conveying that expression? Or if we're trying to provide an element of curiosity, how does that help the viewer connect the dots between what they're seeing, what you're saying, what you mean, and where you want them to go? Right? So I think that those are really, really important to keep in mind. So again, you're like, what does architecture, interior design, and graphic design have to do with podcasting? Like a lot, right? Like we design a lot of information. I create a lot of assets. When you're creating assets for social media, the way that information is designed, it is make it or break it, right? I talk with clients all the time. Less is more, and that of course connects to my journalism background. But when you're designing something, having negative space, which is the space with nothing, is really important. And so a lot of times clients want to put everything on one post when I go, hey, let's break that into maybe like a multi-page, a carousel post, or maybe we do 3 posts instead of 1. Those are just like separate things, right? So all of that knowledge of like how design affects how we perceive information, how we process information, those are really important that I'm like always using all the time, even though that is a personal interest of mine, which is as well user experience and buyer psychology. I'm such a nerd on that. I really, not only because my husband is a user experience researcher, and I absorb a lot by osmosis, but I just consume a lot of buyer psychology because marketing the podcast is going to be way more effective if you understand buyer psychology, if you understand user paths. So for instance, when I'm thinking about curating a listener experience and making the journey in a specific way, like understanding how people behave. And for instance, I always mention on the podcast, people want to be told what to do. And so, for instance, that was super helpful when I was crafting a podcast episode about passive and active marketing. And so how you can really grow your podcast by understanding what are people supposed to do next, how people find your show, thinking from how does someone go from a listener to a lead? How do people get lost? Why do people get lost? Really always thinking about from the standpoint, if I know nothing about your brand or if I'm just into your content and I'm listening to an episode and I want to work with you, how can I work with you? Do we have all those steps that are frictionless to help the listener who is interested in working with you listen to the show, go to the show notes because you told them to go to the show notes, and then go and click on a discovery call, right? Even on your website, is it easy for them to book a time with you? So as you can see by now, how did all of this different experience match up in a way that is perfect for the journey that I'm in right now, for the company that I've built? And so all of these elements create a very unique show promise, a very unique show persona that attracts an audience. They're like, okay, when you're your most authentic self, it does show, right? So I hope that as you're listening to this, you're thinking and recognizing some elements that you do have as well on your end, right? I really want you to pay attention to the things that draw you in, that you're attracted to, because if you're interested in them, your listeners are kind of likely going to be interested as well. So it's a way to connect them. And so if you're listening to this show, you're not listening because I have the answer to every single question. It's because you connect to specific parts of my expertise or maybe my humanity. All right, so let's talk about some of my clients' examples. So my client Hethel, I actually have a podcast episode that I recorded with her. So excited. Her podcast is all about global health. And so I'll include the link in the show notes if you want to listen to that episode and talk about like our work together. But Hethel originally, she has a formal background in biomedical engineering. She's not a podcaster. She is not a doctor. And so what she did was she had an interest in global health. And so she had a passion in storytelling, but all of these things that she thought was like, oh, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to cover this topic. And so on her podcast, she had her guests obviously be the experts. But what was really interesting from Hethel's side is that she was the beginner, right? So she was like, hey, I don't know much about this, but you and I, let's go find out together with this person who's an expert. And what was really interesting is that through our work together, we started working together when her show was on hiatus. And so one of the coolest things that we helped define for Hethel's show was, okay, your show is very niche. Global health is very specific. But through her podcast, she was able to not only fill out volunteer opportunities that this organization had been like waiting for months to fill out. And somebody listened to the podcast because, again, it was optimized for discovery. And so when that person found out about that position, they were like applying, and then they actually filled that vacancy that the nonprofit had been working on for so long. And so I love that Hethel, what she did was, okay, really leaning in, and that's what we did. It was like, okay, how does your background in biomedical engineering help you understand this? And so like lean into some parts of the show that really, really showcased how her brain worked. And she loved deconstructing things. So instead of being like, oh, I'm not enough because I don't know about this, is like, hey, like I have this interest in how things work. I have a little bit of knowledge in global health. I have an interest in that. I love storytelling. So how can we craft compelling stories that help people care about issues that happen all around the world? And I thought that was one of the best shows. We had such great fun working together, but also like some amazing results. Like together we figured out like, okay, what are the needs of working with these organizations, and how can you leverage your expertise in storytelling to help these nonprofits reach even more people? We worked together to basically craft sponsorship opportunities. And so she was able to monetize these podcasts that has less than 600 downloads per month. And I think at the end of the year, it was about $7,000 that she made through the podcast because of all of her storytelling abilities, all of her capacity to break down complex stories and complex topics into really attainable stories from the beginner's standpoint, right? So that always makes me happy and such a great example. And then also Danny, I actually accidentally picked two podcasts that are kind of like about wellness and health. So my client Danny, her podcast, the Well Report podcast, it's all about like inclusivity and wellness. And so what we worked on the show was to develop a content strategy that would lean into diverse voices and craft a content strategy that would make her kind of learn more about topics that really interested her and create a space for her, showed her as a woman of color that is talking about wellness to make it more inclusive. And so that was really cool to think about like, okay, if we want to bring in an expert, are they meeting the criteria specific to what your main goal is? And so it was so cool to explore her interests and what already was working for her to develop that content strategy that in a way helped her develop a really exciting sustainable strategy for the show. And so how do you like talk about wellness in a way that feels compelling and that honors the audience she's wanting to talk to? Because before we started working together, the show was lacking that very specific angle. And so as we bring the episode to a close, I want to kind of like leave you with a few final notes. So you're diverse experience, skill set, knowledge of the world, and interests do affect how you craft a show. So stop trying to create a show that is a format by someone else and really start leaning into that outsider perspective, because it's still valuable. People still seek that, right? Second, I want you to focus on what your experience has taught you, not what you lack. Let's focus on our strengths, not our perceived weaknesses. Because again, we, if as business owners, can do business and connect to people who are specifically looking for the type of expertise and product that we have, it's the same for the show, right? So as a business owner, you don't every day wake up and think, oh man, like these are the things that I don't do, right? Like same thing, right? Focus on what we have and how they can be more integrated with the day-to-day. And then last but not least, what makes your show premise unique? Like really take time to think about what is the unique angle of your show. What are things that resonate with you, that resonate with the audience as well, beyond just the overall promise of the show, right? I want you to really think about these elements, because in 2026, in the coming years, we're going to really see a rise in AI and a very big flood of content that is kind of bleh. So if you want to stand out in the coming years, if you want a show that creates that emotional connection with the audience, a show that gets recommended, a podcast that is listened to all over the world and that makes you a successful professional, a happy business owner, but also someone who keeps challenging themselves, let's work together, because I know you have big plans for your show, right? So if you're feeling lost, if you feel like you're needing someone to help you sift through all the ideas or no ideas at all, and you need to talk to someone to get them out of your head or help you craft a strategy that will make content creation easier, let's talk. My goal is to help podcasters, impact-driven podcasters like you, create more meaningful content in 2026, more sustainable formats that help you stay in the game longer, and truly stand out as an authority that you are in your field. So visit the show notes or the podcastbase.com/grow. And I would love to talk about on a free discovery call. It's just 30 minutes. We talk about the needs and how we can work together, if it makes sense or not. And I would love to be able to help you grow in this new year that is coming up so quickly. All right, I will say, as per usual, everything that I mentioned will be in the show notes. And I've been Anna Xavier, and I'll see you in the next episode. Until then, keep creating imperfect content that moves you forward. Bye.